It's a country that presents itself as a defender of democracy, freedom of speech, being the land of the free. But a crackdown on dissent in the US is raising the question of who gets to speak and who gets silenced. I'm Stefanie Dekker, and this is The Stream.
Unfortunately, we don't have freedom of speech anymore.
The Trump administration just canceled $400 million worth of grants and contracts for Columbia University.
Trump called Harvard a threat to democracy while simultaneously trying to dictate the classes they can teach, who they can hire, and what political views the students can have. That's not democracy. That's authoritarianism with a PR team.
U.S. citizens are still getting detained coming into the United States.
For those of you who don't know, I was detained by Customs and Border Patrol.
It's a shame how dishonest the media is. The media is corrupt and they're dishonest, and they're so bad for our country.
Freedoms protected by the First Amendment are essential to maintaining an open and democratic society.
Once everybody's eyes are awake to the fact that the Constitution doesn't prevent the president from taking over all three branches of government, there's no coming back from that.
Don't have free speech, then we just don't have a free country. It's as simple as that.
The First Amendment of the US Constitution promises freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the right to assemble and to petition. Those are the values America says it stands for. But what happens when those rights are threatened by political leaders using their platforms and power to intimidate and crack down on opinions they don't agree with? Well, to discuss all of this, let's bring in our guests. We have Conor Fitzpatrick. He's a supervising senior lawyer for the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, also known as FIRE, and he joins us from Washington, D.C. We have Nora Benavidez. She is a civil rights lawyer and free speech advocate at Free Press, joining us from Los Angeles. And Tamara Turki is a Palestinian-Austrian journalist and law graduate from Columbia University, and she joins us from New York City. Thank you so much for joining us. Nora, let me start with you. Let's get straight to the point. What is happening to free speech under this U.S. administration?
Well, it's good to be here today to talk about this topic. You know, the truth is, most of us don't often feel like free speech is a topic we encounter, or that it certainly won't affect us. But in just a few short months, the second Trump administration has taken aggressive and dangerous actions to gut a number of things that are really the cornerstones of democracy. Free speech is one of those. He's gone after the press. He's removed journalists from press briefings. He's removed entire wire services from having access to the White House. He has leveraged agencies like the FCC to try to go after and figure out if they can take away broadcast licenses simply because Trump dislikes the news coverage about him, or he is worried about the coverage about his political opponents. On top of that, the administration has actually started monitoring students and other people's social media accounts to see if their beliefs are things that could become deportable offenses. We've seen that student visas have been revoked simply for protected political speech. This is really a more dangerous climate than I've seen in my career. I'm very worried. And, you know, I think it permeates almost everything. It's the news we see. It's the way we feel apathetic or chaotic. We look around and we don't even know how to make sense of the rapid pace of erosion in this democracy.
Conor, you're nodding. Would you agree with that? This is very much your field, of course. How would you describe what you're facing?
What we've seen is an absolute avalanche of attacks against free speech since Donald Trump took office. Now, to be clear, attacks against free speech are not unique to either Democrats or Republicans. Attacks against free speech have existed since the start of our republic. But since the start of our republic, we have had the First Amendment. The First Amendment provides the strongest legal protection for free speech of any country in the world. But what we've seen over the last few months are three specific lines of attacks against free speech in the United States from the Trump administration. The first is attacking the free speech rights of non-citizens. We've seen non-citizens like Mahmoud Khalil and Ramesia Ozturk facing deportation for nothing more than protected speech, nothing more than expressing their opinions. We've heard a lot from the Trump administration, and rightly so, that students should not be allowed to vandalize university buildings and should not be allowed to block Jewish students from going to class. That's absolutely right. But what we're seeing from this administration is attempts to deport people not for what they're doing, but for what they're saying, and that's not okay. The second line of attack that we're seeing by the Trump administration and by Mr. Trump is attacking journalists, attacking the press. They barred the Associated Press from the briefing room before they got a court order reversing it. They're threatening to revoke the broadcast licenses of networks who don't report things the way they want them to. And in the courts, he's trying to sue CBS for unfavorable coverage or favorable coverage of Kamala Harris. And he's suing the Des Moines Register and Ann Selzer, the prominent pollster, because he doesn't like what they have to say. And then finally, we're seeing attacks against universities. We're seeing instances like Harvard and Columbia, where there are some certainly legitimate aspects of what they've done that may well violate the law. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to use the hook of funding to get them to change how they're teaching, to get them to change the way that they're presenting certain subjects in class, particularly on the Middle East. And all of these three run flatly contrary to our First Amendment.
Yes, we're going to go to the experience of Columbia University with Tamara in a second, but people have been posting videos online shedding light on the detainment of others and spreading awareness. Now, they're worried that even they could be on a watch list. Take a listen to this from TikTok.
The Trump administration is officially detaining American citizens who have been accused of no crimes solely because they have political opinions he doesn't agree with. Streamer and political influencer Hassan Piker was detained for hours at the border trying to come back into the country after an international trip. Officers repeatedly asked him about his political ideology, his criticisms of Donald Trump, and even brought up his history of bans on Twitch. In a separate incident, another influencer, Savannah Pinder, was also detained and questioned for hours by Customs and Border Patrol. They asked for access to her digital devices and to all of her social media accounts. It shouldn't be controversial to say that detaining people based solely off of their political ideology is a direct attack on the First Amendment of the Constitution. As someone who speaks a lot about politics online, I'm certain my name is on some registry somewhere. Here's the point. They're trying to scare us out of using our voices, and we cannot let them. This is the time to get louder, not run scared.
Tamara, how would you describe the reaction of the Trump administration on the anti-war protests? Has it scared you? Has it made you or your peers fearful for repercussions, fearful to speak out?
I mean, I would describe the response as very draconian. I think everyone should be incredibly alarmed by these current political conditions and how they're impacting college campuses. Because last spring, the encampments had happened and had lasted for about 2 weeks before the cops arrived. This semester, any pro-Palestine protest is shut down with police arrests within the matter of hours. Just yesterday, we had a protest outside of our university commencement where student activists and alum were arrested, the first one being within minutes of the protest starting. In February, shortly after Mahmoud Khalil was detained and Trump cut $400 million from Columbia, our university administration implemented a list of Trump's demands, which included a mask ban, placing our Department of Middle Eastern Studies under administrative control, and hiring 36 new campus security officers with powers to arrest students. And there had been this saying going around that Columbia had capitulated to fascism. I don't think that's the case. I think Columbia is colluding with fascism because these are measures that the university had been trying to implement all year long, but only felt emboldened to do so as under the new Trump government. And I think what alarms me is that a lot of students and faculty are self-censoring right now to avoid the same political wrath that Mahmoud Khalil and others have faced. At the, Columbia Journalism School, I have classmates who publish articles anonymously when talking about Palestine, or just avoid talking about it at all. And even for me as an international student on a visa, I feel incredibly anxious just to leave the house because I can get snatched off the streets at any moment with zero impunity.
Nora, you're nodding.
Well, it's horrible to listen firsthand to the accounts of someone who says, I'm making choices about my bodily autonomy, where I come and go, what I say online. That is really a state of terror, I think. And that's the point. The point is to create a climate in which people are worried to speak out, where they might weigh the choices in front of them and ultimately decide, I think I'm actually going to sit this out. And when that happens, that gives autocrats, that gives authoritarians, that gives illiberal and bigoted leaders an opening to take more power. And so in a way, this free speech moment in the age of retaliation, of revenge, of sort of the free speech for Trump, but for no one else if he dislikes them, that has ultimately given people a kind of fear to take action and challenge him. And I would just remind all of us that the ground we cede, whether it's lawyers who are afraid of signing on to supporting briefs when law firms get attacked through executive orders, whether it's journalists who consider and ultimately are worried about the coverage that they may include and try to water down their coverage of Trump, whatever the calculus is, we can't cede ground in a moment just because we're afraid. We have to keep moving forward and leveraging our voices.
Well, it's interesting. At his joint address to Congress in March, US President Donald Trump said he brought back free speech, but not everyone is convinced.
Did you hear the news?
And I have stopped all government censorship and brought back free speech in America. It's back.
That's right. Trump brought free speech back, except he didn't, because earlier that day, Trump truthed on Truth Social a threat to any college student who protests Israel. Colleges could lose federal funding if they don't crack down on pro-Palestinian protests. Foreign college students could be sent home or imprisoned, and even American college students are deprived of their First Amendment rights. And it goes beyond that. The Trump administration has signed executive orders that crack down on what people can teach in schools. They've targeted history curriculums for teaching the real racist history of this country. So tell me, how did Trump bring free speech back when you can't criticize a U.S. ally? How is free speech being protected when college students could be imprisoned for exercising their rights?
Now, FIRE, that's the organization that Conor represents, and the Polarization Research Lab at Dartmouth College conducted some research in 2024. Now, this poll shows that 69% of Americans feel that the country is on the wrong track when it comes to freedom of speech. Now, Conor, you made a very important point in your pre-interview. You said that you're a freedom of speech lawyer. You defend speech whether you agree with it or not, and that is the essence of free speech, isn't it? So what is Trump doing?
Trump is certainly not protecting free speech in the slightest. In his first couple of weeks in office, he signed an executive order purporting to bring back free speech to the United States federal government. And just about every action before and after that executive order has been the exact opposite of protecting free speech. What we've seen is attempts to go after law firms who represent causes that the administration doesn't like. Those have been uniformly slapped down by the federal courts. Many of the judges have been incredulous that the administration would even attempt something like going after attorneys who, after all, are officers of a court merely for the causes and the views they represent. But this gets to a very real, I think, misunderstanding of free speech that's not only reflected by this administration, but reflected by many in this country and internationally about what free speech is. I think when you ask most people if they believe in free speech, most people probably say yes. But for us, the question is, after you say, I believe in free speech, does that end with a period or does that end with a comma but? Because so often when somebody professes to believe in free speech, they always seem to be able to think of an exception for why speech they disagree with shouldn't be protected. But the core of free speech is that whether you are pro-Israel or pro-Palestine or neutral or anything else, that you have the right to your own opinion and you have the right to voice that opinion without interference from the government. Because the only alternative is allowing the government to decide which opinions are and aren't okay. And America's truth since 1791, since we ratified the First Amendment, is that we will never give the government the power to tell us which ideas are and aren't okay for us.
I think it's extraordinary, Tamara, what you said, that you are fearful to leave your house because of the values and your political position. Now, it's not just openly on campus, it's also on social media, right? A lot of people are fearful to express themselves openly. How would you describe the culture on social media? Are you fearful that it's being monitored?
A lot of student activists, particularly women at Columbia, are receiving rape threats, death threats. And so it's a very hostile environment, both online and offline. And I think particularly with the detention of Rumaisa for publishing an op-ed, I think that particularly sets a very worrying trend for what you can say and cannot say online, because I don't think it's necessarily protests that are happening in a physical and material way that are being targeted. I think any criticism of Israel is perceived to be a threat to this government. But I would like to sort of contextualize that, because I think a lot of the reason why we're having this discussion now is because of the detentions under Trump. And, you know, when Mahmoud was detained, I was, you know, devastated and afraid for myself, but it didn't feel like an unfamiliar political climate, because students had been repressed for already quite some time at that point. The first arrests that had been made against student activists for protesting against the genocide happened under a Biden administration. There was a Washington Post investigation which revealed that New York Mayor Eric Adams, who is a Democrat, was colluding with Zionist billionaires in a WhatsApp group in order to make sure that these students were, you know, arrested. And so I think even in moments when it felt like there was a time where free speech was protected, at least when it comes to Palestine, there is sort of an illusion to that, because I think even in progressive spaces, which are supposed to be a safe space for dialogue, yes, you can criticize Israel, but so long as you frame it as a critique of its right-wing government, what remains impermissible is criticizing the very notion that Israel, as a settler colonial project built on the ethnic cleansing of Palestinian people, has a right to exist. And so I think with Trump, the state repression is very blunt and aggressive, and it's in your face. But with Democrats and liberals, rather than outright banning our speech, they've been for years trying to manage it, define its boundaries, sanitize its message, and to make it more palatable. So yes, these detentions are unprecedented, but people have been losing so much for so long for speaking about Palestine.
Nora, what is the legal recourse or any recourse that the ordinary person who might get grabbed off the street has? Is this legal, what is happening? Can they fight it? Like how does this work?
Well, so much of this is wrapped up in and framed by the Trump administration as part of their, you know, ability to crack down on immigration and the rise of immigrants who come to this country. And it is a convenient wedge to use students who have spoken out in support of Palestinian rights, because it's considered then so controversial in public discourse. And what we've really seen is very little improvement, as the Trump administration would love to describe it as, with deportations. These are actually incredibly dangerous periods for us. We have seen students and others picked up off the street, in their homes, near their homes, going to pick up their children from school. And many are essentially disappeared with forced removal. Just to walk through a little bit of what's happening from a legal perspective, this includes a number of things. First, with people like Mahmoud Khalil, we know that his case included no arrest, there was no warrant. He really only was speaking out about a certain topic. And when ICE agents came to Columbia University housing and picked him up, he didn't resist. He didn't do anything that would otherwise be contrary. He was picked up. He was then essentially disappeared. His lawyers couldn't find him. All of this in violation of his basic due process rights. And that pattern has occurred over and over again with people who have been picked up, who are either legal permanent residents or otherwise have some protected status in this country. And so it flies in the face of everything our Constitution stands for. While this country has been flawed forever, I would say, since its inception, the very notion is it's a country that we fight for. The free speech components of the First Amendment, that we have the right to speak, to assemble, to think things, to have ideas. And what we've learned from people like Secretary of State Marco Rubio, even anticipated beliefs, the expected thoughts we might one day have, he hopes can ultimately become deportable offenses. That flies in the face of the First Amendment and our due process rights.
And it's very scary. Certainly, Conor, we're running out of time, so I want to still get a couple of questions in. Your law firm, I believe, represents a client that the Trump administration is taking legal action against. Are you concerned that at some point something may happen to you or one of your colleagues?
So a couple of things. One, we aren't actively representing any of the non-citizens that the Trump administration has targeted. We have filed amicus curiae briefs, friend of the court briefs, in support of both Mahmoud Khalil and Ramesia Ozturk, and we stand ready and willing to assist those efforts however we can. But what we're seeing and what's very troubling is that we hear from the administration protests that this is not about free speech, that there's other evidence we don't know about these individuals. But now we know that's not true. A couple of weeks ago, a federal judge held an evidentiary hearing in Ramesia Ozturk's case and challenged the government to provide some basis other than her op-ed for continuing to detain her. And not only did the government come with nothing, they had no exhibits, they had no witnesses, they didn't even cross-examine her. So the idea that there's some secret pile of evidence somewhere that would support detaining and deporting.
So how does someone fight this? How do you counter this?
Lawyers, lawsuits. It takes vigilance. It takes frankly non-citizens who will be courageous enough to stand up and fight this in court, like Mahmoud Khalil and Ramesia Ozturk are doing. This isn't a battle that is going to be won in a couple of weeks. This is going to take months and years of vigilance to keep the First Amendment protection strong in the United States.
Tamara, there is a two-tier system when it comes to free speech as well, when it comes to Americans, when it comes to foreigners. You know, the United States has always been presented and perceived by those outside of it as the land of the free. I can come here with all my dreams. There's equal opportunities. I can build that. It seems under this U.S. administration, it is only really whether they will agree with you if you get a fair chance. How would you describe the America that you see today?
I mean, I've been American educated my entire life. And the reason why I came to Columbia and came to the US was because of the free thinking and creativity that the American education system was intended to allow. So I feel very disillusioned with the way things have been here. I think it's been really incredibly difficult to complete my education while, you know, there's imminent threat to my safety as well as other members of my community. I think what's difficult is you're not just worried about yourself, you're worried about everyone that's sort of around you. And I think we may not have control over which policies Trump chooses to enact, but what we do have control over is how we respond to them. For months, people have been telling me that I'm so brave as an international student for continuing to speak about Palestine while being in the US. But I don't feel very brave. I do feel afraid sometimes. I just choose not to act on it, especially when I'm seeing all the images that are coming out of Gaza. Yesterday was my graduation, and just before I had left the house, I was looking at an image of an elderly man in Gaza who was sobbing because he had hadn't eaten for 3 days under Israel's blockade. And just a minute before I stepped onto stage to get my graduation diploma, I had received news that ICE prevented Mahmoud Khalid from being able to hold his baby, which is absolutely devastating. So I think we can't allow ourselves to be afraid and to be intimidated. And although, yes, international students are at risk, I think we need to recognize that there is a certain level of privilege that we have by being here and studying in the West. And now more than ever, it's important for American citizens, both students and faculty, especially tenured ones, to step up and do everything they can to make sure that we're protected and that we're safe.
To step up. That is all we have time for this discussion. Thank you so much, Conor, Nora and Tamara, for joining us. And thank you all for being part of the conversation. And I'll see you soon.